The subject that we chose to talk about today is prostitution throughout history, and just as a warning, we are going to discuss certain elements that might be upsetting for some listeners, such as consent and sexual violence. So just be warned going into this episode that we are going to touch on those subjects. That's it. Thank you very much.
We all know that prostitution is considered to be the world's oldest profession. Perceptions of prostitution are usually based on culturally determined values that differ between societies. Like, I'm not sure if you knew, I didn't before researching for this, that in Germany, Switzerland, Greece, Austria, and many other European countries, prostitution is legal and regulated. I didn't know about Greece, which is ironic because I wrote about Greece.
Oh, right. Yeah, because isn't there a red light district in Amsterdam?
I knew about Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. I didn't know about... And there are many countries in Europe where, well, technically prostitution isn't illegal, but it's illegal to solicit prostitution, which pretty much means it's illegal. So I wrote about Greek courtesans. In ancient Greece, prostitution was common in most of the important cities, and particularly for many port cities did not condemn brothels, but cities were okay with brothels. It was popular. Prostitution in ancient Greece was popular, and usually in ports because, what do you know, that's where great numbers of men happen to be at one time.
Yeah, that continued, and it's the same during the Victorian era.
Yeah.
Ports were very famous for that.
I would assume it's pretty similar today as well.
Well, now it's highways or gas stations.
Well, but is that popular? Because you don't really see 20 prostitutes at a gas station.
Because it's illegal.
Right. Prostitution was legal in Athens. However, it was forbidden to be practiced by an Athenian citizen.
So they had to bring people from the outside?
Well, yes, because most of the prostitutes in ancient Greece were slaves, former slaves, or people that sort of lost their stature after cities were conquered. They would lose their power in the state, so they would become prostitutes. So they would call these prostitutes, well, they would call courtesans, which were rather different. They would call them Hetera. They were more educated than wives and daughters of the men that would request their services. They were also very skilled in entertainment. They would play music, they would dance, and they were considered to be smart.
Would they train throughout their lives?
Well, considering that most courtesans were people that did grow up in sort of wealth, that lost their wealth during maybe
being conquered.
Right, maybe being conquered. It would make sense why they were so educated. Okay, so these were the companions, the courtesans, the Hetera. There were also common brothel or street prostitutes, which were called porne. They offered only the physical pleasure to their clients, and they were seen as lower in class and stature than the first ones, and they would have lower prices. They were seen as less.
There's a whole system.
Yes, there were different types as well, but I just didn't mention them.
So were the high-end ones requested by like royalty?
They were usually requested by people important in the state,
and then
or people that had the wealth to sustain, because they were mistresses. They would have a relationship with
kind of like an escort, kind of.
Yes, an escort is a good way to describe them.
And then the ones that weren't as educated, they booked by people from like the middle class, quote unquote.
Yeah. I think it was definitely a class thing, because from what I remember, in this was the situation in Athens, but in Sparta, prostitution wasn't a thing in the beginning, because you're supposed to pay the women that do that, and they they didn't have that much metal and
to pay.
Yeah, and it was very valuable, and they would rather use it to make weapons or whatever Spartans made. So they wouldn't use it to pay women. And as the situation got better, then prostitution sort of became a thing there as well. Oh, and my point was, because I don't think I got to the point that I was trying to. My point was that there was a different sort of class system for the prostitutes, because in the beginning they were only seen as luxury. Not any man could afford to pay for a prostitute. And then as the economy got better, people sort of got more access to them. And to keep the sort of the illusion of class, people that were rich sort of wanted a distinction between prostitutes.
That's why they did we have the high-end services.
That's how the thing sort of came to be. I don't think it was something that was conscious, but it is just like any other luxury product today. Like in 50 years, it will probably be very cheap to make and anyone will afford it.
So would they benefit of their money like 100%? Would they actually get all the money?
I'm not really sure about that. I don't think so. Well, it's very, because they also had to, I'll get there, because they also had this symposium. That was what the sort of brothel for the courtesans was called. It was kind of like a nightclub where people would go and these ladies would entertain the men. And some actually owned certain houses that were symposiums, but symposiums were also instituted by the state. So I doubt they would keep all the money.
Yeah, because it was legal and they would have to kind of have an authority. Yeah. And there were like laws and rules.
There must have been some tax, some payment that they would require.
I know some of them were doing it because it was like a result of being conquered. And then some of them were slaves. Were there any doing it on their own volition?
Well, I think most of them were doing it because well, it's difficult because you don't know. Most of these people didn't have any other choice. But I'm not...
Were there any jobs for women during that time? Or was it the only thing that would give them an income was marrying someone?
I think there were. Because think about it, even in the medieval times, like, sure, higher class women never worked, but the middle class and the lower class always worked. Okay, so prostitution was an open and legal part of Greek society where public brothels were often funded by the state because they were seen as a necessary part of life. But it is still reported to have negative connotations. It was associated that, sure, it was believed that you could go there and have fun and, oh, it's fine and whatever. But you weren't allowed to do it too much because then you would...
How would they keep count?
I'm not sure. Well, maybe Athens at the time was pretty small. People would know. Because they would think like, oh, you're going to the prostitutes, then that means you're neglecting your wife. Or, oh, you're wasting all your fortune that your parents and you yourself worked for. It was kind of like gambling. So it
was better regulated back then than now. But gambling now is not that regulated. They just say, oh, stop. Oh, stop it.
Please don't. I read a few papers. I found a few papers, like academic papers that smarter people than me wrote. Because I was trying to paint a clear picture of the ancient Greek perspective of sex workers. So Plutarch, for example, put a pretty negative notion. He sort of what I mentioned before, where it wasn't a positive thing, sort of like gambling. I think the metaphor, the comparison to gambling is actually very good because it's fun and nice and cool for a weekend in Vegas, but it's not as cool and nice and fun if you make an obsession out of it. It becomes a problem. So that's how they saw it. They saw it that like it could corrupt the individual. But it's very, I find it quite hypocritical, because then he would mention that he didn't condemn the enjoyment of carnal pleasure.
But with measure.
Right.
It's like not too much.
Yeah, moderation is key. So the distinction between the courtesans and the lower class prostitutes, sort of like the street prostitutes, was also emphasized by how they were paid, because the Hetera, the courtesans, were sort of paid in gifts, in very expensive gifts.
I'd rather the money.
I think they were also paid in money, but they were mostly paid in gifts. And it was seen like, because it had the sort of, a gift is personalized. It's just for you. It's not, money is for everybody.
Because it was like more of a relationship thing.
Right.
They were like, oh, let me give you something personal, because you're not like the middle class level courtesan, and I know you and we've bonded, and this is how I show my appreciation, rather than just money, which is not very thoughtful.
Yeah. The courtesan-client relationship was seen as a long-term companionship, specifically to those relations where the client, the man, was considerably wealthy, or was famous, or had some political importance. Wealthy courtesans, they saw more value in the adoration that their lovers gave them than the money.
Physical things.
Right. And it was seen as, if someone was so in love with you, it was seen as a high stature.
Yeah, like you're on a pedestal.
Yeah.
What about the wives?
From this class. Well, never mind the wives.
Oh my god. It was kind of like a god mentality. Like, look how much I'm being loved and venerated, and
I think so. It was this, yeah, the muse.
Yeah, it was more of an ego thing.
It must have been.
On an ego trip. Would they only have one partner, one man that was they were in relationship with?
I would assume that was the case if the man was someone important in the state.
You can't really go with the president and then with the vice president as well.
Right. But in the symposium, for example, where they would men would gather to drink, to eat, to party, I don't think that there was a rule there. It was, I think it was, because it felt to me, reading it reminded me of the Japanese geisha.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but I didn't want to...
It would have been a good point.
Yeah, I didn't want to compare just in case. Because I know geishas went through this whole process and they were like learning a lot. I didn't want to compare that because that was actually like work.
Yeah, they were also highly educated, highly skilled in playing an instrument and singing and
entertainment.
Being entertainers, yeah.
I thought it would be a bit wrong to compare the two. But some aspects, I guess, translate to the other.
Yeah, they do have common
elements. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What would religious people say about this?
Well, Zeus would screw around any time. So I doubt it was a problem. I think at that time in history, they didn't have the same morals we have today. I don't think that they had the concept of cheating, for example.
So what would you call this? Like, what would, from the wife's perspective, was she happy with this? Was she okay with this? But maybe because it was so normal, it was just...
Probably.
Because at the end of the day, he might have still loved the wife, but he was just looking for certain services from the...
You also have to remember that at the time, most marriages were, and for a long time...
Arranged.
Yeah, and for for a long time in history, marriages were mostly seen as an economic thing that you had to do. You wouldn't marry out of love, or it was kind of a business contract. So I guess in a way, maybe this thing was also seen as, oh, my husband, as in my business partner, is going
to a business meeting.
And then he'll come back and whatever. I also found that in these symposiums, you remember the type of pottery ancient Greeks had? I always remember the ones in Disney's Hercules with all these silhouettes. Apparently, each shape meant something else, and they had different uses, and so they were used as decorations in these symposiums. I suppose they were all used as decorations everywhere. But here, where these people would gather to do their business, you would have these scenes of, well, sexual acts.
On the actual ornament?
Yeah, and they're actually pretty graphic.
Oh, God.
Greek pottery gave us some of the most distinctive, influential, and beautiful shapes and designs of antiquity, but it has also given us a window into the lives and practices of these people. So, because we know that these scenes that were depicted on the vases were things that ancient Greeks would experience, it's very easy to determine what they were doing at their parties. Oh, I'm not sure if I mentioned these type of parties were obviously only male.
Oh, you didn't mention.
Right. You don't bring your wife to meet your girlfriend. I looked into famous courtesans, and Aspasia of Miletus came up a few times. She was one of the most successful courtesans of the period. She was the courtesan of a great statesman, Pericles. The writings about her are most interesting and detailed, and she was practically the only woman that was written about at the time.
Ever.
Right. And it's interesting because she was technically a prostitute.
Which then again, they venerated. So she was quite high up.
Yeah. She was noted to be a teacher of rhetoric, a philosopher, and a writer. Aspasia was from an aristocratic family, and she became the mistress of her partner. She was a former member of an aristocratic family, which is why she was so highly educated. Mm-hmm. And she actually had a son with her partner. His name was also Pericles, and he was actually made citizen of Athens because, if you remember, slaves, former slaves, and people that they weren't
Athenians,
right?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because some people believe that she wasn't a courtesan, that she was actually his wife, but due to the fact that she wasn't a citizen, she was only seen as a courtesan.
So you couldn't marry anyone from a different city?
It wasn't that she was from a different city. She wasn't a citizen. She didn't have the citizenship.
Okay, yeah.
But even considering that, maybe she wasn't actually a Hetera, you have to take into account that also means that these courtesans were actually expected to be quite educated and smart and accomplished.
They're asking a lot. Yeah, entertain me, but also be smart, but also have no rights.
People argue whether these women were respected elite women, as in, oh, girl power, I have independence.
Probably not.
I'm smarter than most women, but they were also seen as inferior to most people. They had many advantages, but on the other hand, there are also, on the pottery, you would also have violent scenes portrayed that sort of imply that they didn't have a so wonderful life.
Didn't expect them to, considering that they were slaves and they were conquered.
And that's it. I'm sorry, I ended it sort of on a downer.
There are a lot of similarities with the Victorian era regarding the class classes and how they would have special places where things would happen and men would be able to meet with them.
The symposium?
Yes, the symposiums.
But were they also called symposiums in the Victorian?
No, they were called
Then don't,
something else.
Because it's a very singular thing. Just call them brothels.
Well, yeah, brothels, but I was just going to say that a symposium sounds like something that a spectacle would happen, right? Somewhere where a spectacle would happen. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's very similar with the places they would organize these meetings, but it's more secretive in the Victorian era. There is no pottery displaying what's happening in there. It was all very hush hush.
But I'm confused. Did they also have classes among prostitutes?
No, but they had just social classes in general. And it was just one specific... Well, it was the fact that some prostitutes would be only doing work around dock areas, and some of them were...
Oh, they would have their own territories.
Yeah.
Kind of like what they have today.
Yeah. Anyway, we can get into that. So the Victorian era is during Queen Victoria's reign. It was between 1837 and 1901. And there were a lot of social, economical, and religious things happening that influenced the booming of prostitution, because it was a really big problem. Prostitution was a problem from people's point of views during the Victorian era, because a lot of women were doing it and people were trying to combat it with reforms.
As far as I know, I think it's the first time where they started to record gigantic numbers in sexually transmitted diseases.
Oh yeah. I mean, people were nasty in general during the Victorian era, but like now it was even worse. Like just... Also, the Industrial Revolution was happening during that time. That was the time when people would just shit in a bucket and throw their bucket outside the window. That's why in England, you see buildings that are built at an angle. So the balcony or like the upstairs windows are further out than the entrance. So then when they throw the shit out, it doesn't go straight on their doormat.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's beautiful to look at the buildings and just imagine, shit was thrown out of there.
On their doormat. All right, because I'm worried only about the shit on my doormat.
Yes.
I'm not worried about the shit in front of my door.
No, yeah, just on your doormat.
It's fine to have it there.
So a lot of reforms were happening. Like more people were allowed to vote during this time, which is still not that great, but like people that would own land and kind of like getting closer to middle class people being allowed to vote rather than just the aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And during this time, a lot of people belonging to the Methodist and evangelical wing of the Church of England, they were also pushing the higher moral and high standards agenda. You know, like they were trying to motivate people to reach higher morals, you know?
Right. Which I find it hilarious that this was the time where
prostitution boomed.
Right. It boomed.
It just gets even more hilarious, honestly. People were also trying to be more liberal from like a philosophical point of view, connecting it to our first episode. They were trying to move away from rationalism and more to like even art, be more liberal, not as constrained from previous norms and
that's interesting
ideologies. I think the Industrial Revolution was happening, so even until now, the Industrial Revolution was the era where most innovations happened.
Mm-hmm.
So since then, we haven't been as creative and innovative.
That's true.
At that level, which I found out, I was like, what? But we've done so much.
Did we?
But I'm guessing it's the density of the amount of new ideas, probably.
Yeah, people really came up with new shit every other day.
People were also getting more educated during this time. Like, more people were going to school. It was open to lower classes to go to school, I'm guessing, rather than just the aristocracy, again. And the Industrial Revolution meant that there were more jobs And it also meant that there were more people in, let's say, London. It became very dense. And because there were more jobs and men were more focused on getting a good income, well, it wasn't that good, but they were more focused on saving money before marriage rather than just going into it. So they wanted to have a little bit of an income, a house, and then get married. That meant that women got married later. So they were kind of without an income earlier. So that was kind of one of the factors why they went into prostitution, because they needed money.
I see.
Because even if they had a fortune, like their dad left money to them, it would have gone to the next male relative in their family, so not even to them. So a lot of women would just think they have this fortune.
But wait, was that the case? Because I knew that was the case for rich people, aristocracy.
I mean, even middle class people had their fortune. I mean, they had some kind of savings.
Yeah, but was it seen as the same as only it was given only to male?
Yes, women had no rights. Because women and men weren't getting married, that meant that didn't mean they weren't horny anymore. That meant a lot of out of marriage sex was happening, and that was considered prostitution.
Oh,
because
wait a minute.
Women couldn't get married once they lost their innocence, you know?
What?
Men could, but women, no.
But how was that considered prostitution? Were they compensated?
No.
Well, that wasn't prostitution.
They just would call you a prostitute if you were having sex with just one man.
I get it. So they would put a stigma on that woman.
Yes, the stigma was...
She wasn't pure, she wasn't virgin anymore, so she wasn't marriage material.
So she was a prostitute.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's not black, it's white.
They were using this term very loosely.
I see. I was very confused.
Yeah, sorry. Women didn't have rights during this time, right? We established that. So there were jobs that women could go to, but the jobs weren't as varied. There were literally like a few types of jobs, and they weren't paid good at all. So they had a few choices. They would either go and work in, they would either work in factories amongst men.
Did they?
Which meant...
At that time? That's interesting.
Industrial Revolution, they needed every hand they could have to work for them. So they would constantly be around men in those factories, which meant they were more prone on being victims of certain crimes because, again, they didn't have rights. So that would just happen. And then once that happens, you are stripped away from your innocence and your opportunity to get married properly. And then the only viable option for you is to go into prostitution.
Well, that's depressing.
Because even that pays better than working amongst men in a factory. And it was less work. That's what they would say. It was less work and more money. It wasn't as laborious. Another option they would have as a job was to be seamstresses, which is basically just labor, because it would be paid very, very little. It would be long hours, like 12 hours a day, just constantly sewing. They would be paid. They wouldn't have breaks to eat, and whatever they would get paid, it wouldn't even be enough for them to buy food with.
But why were they paid so little? Because you would think that no one would want that job, and you would end up not having people working for you.
Because there was high demand on high fashion, and they would sell clothes to the aristocrats for a lot of money, but they wanted to get it for cheap. Just as nowadays, you get really high branded, expensive clothes that are made in
sweatshops in China.
A third world country. Yeah, sweatshops, literally that. That's what was happening. And they were very crowded, and they would it was a very high demand for high fashion during that time. Okay, the third option they had as a job, if you could say it's a job, it's as a servant to someone's house. So they would basically live with someone, with a family, and they would be the servant. But because they weren't a cook, they weren't the person that would take care of the children, they were kind of in this uneven no man's land where they didn't really have any rights there, and some people wouldn't even pay them. They would only get food from what was left in the house, and they would just have somewhere to sleep, but they weren't paid anything else. And those servants fell victims to their bosses. Like the man of the house would just
take advantage of them
because they had no rights. Again, they couldn't go to anyone for help. And again, you lost your virtue, not by your own accord. Prostitution is the only viable option for you because no one will marry you now. It was very sad.
It is very sad.
But on a positive note, some women wanted to go into prostitution because, again, it was less labor, as they described it, and more pay. And there was this one woman that managed to do it for 3 years. She saved money and then she opened a cafe.
Oh!
She opened a coffee house, so she was the landlady of that coffee house.
There
so then
you go.
she could live... So she didn't have to do it forever.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good job, lady.
I heard that and I was like, oh, at least someone got something else out of it.
Yeah, good on you. That's great.
Okay, at one point, police said that there were about 50,000 prostitutes in London.
Oh my gosh.
But because that term was so loosely used...
Oh, that's true.
You would call someone that looked at you weird or had a different kind of dress or wasn't wearing a corset, you would call them a prostitute because they're
Witches.
Like out of the ordinary. Exactly. So they would count those people as well, those women. But the actual number was about 20,000, which is still a lot for just London.
It is.
But it's blown out of proportion by the police back then.
I see.
When we talk about prostitution, we just talk about the act of performing sex for money. Just the definition that is used today. And then everything else, apart from this, they would find kind of weird. They're like, oh, you prostitutes, you looked at that tree wrong. Yeah, so there was a red light district that they would work in. They would work in dockyards, just like you said with your era. And they would work like street corners. There were famous streets where there would be a lot of them present. And they also had their own kind of groups. So because no one really took care of them and they had no rights, women would form a group and they would take care of each other. So when one of them was caught by the police and put in prison, the other ones would save money and bail her out.
Aww.
Which was kind of a nice...
Troopers.
Yeah. They were like taking care of each other because no one else did. Now we have this guy here. His name is Walter. He was a writer of an 11-volume erotic memoir.
Oh.
And he said that the way of telling what women would be a prostitute was because they would lift their skirt quite high. And if he would go and approach them, he would ask them, quote, "Will you come with me?" End quote. That's how he would know. However,
now I wonder what quite high means.
That was what he was wondering as well. Is like,
oh, he was also confused.
Yeah, like what's high enough? Because some women weren't conforming to the norms, weren't into prostitution, but they were called prostitutes because, I don't know, their skirt was too high. High meaning what? Ankle length.
Yeah.
It wasn't to the ground. Oh, you could see my ankle, so I'm a prostitute.
Which is so stupid because it's so unpractical to have a dress that is ground length.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine how those women did anything.
Yeah, they didn't. They would just faint constantly. A lot of women, though, because there were so many that were doing it, men would just approach any woman on the street and they would just make lewd.
Oh, no.
They would just throw lewd words to them. They would just tell them, oh, come with me, blah, blah, blah. No. And a lot of women, like, there was this guy that said he was walking with his daughter and then some men started accosting her and saying stuff to her. So then women started being advised to wear really ugly clothes when going out.
Oh my God.
And to look down. So I've always wondered, in case of...
Oh God.
In case of rape victims, there's this mentality. The first question they ask is, what was she wearing? Or what did she say to deserve that? Like, what did she say to him for him to do that to her?
Yeah. What did she do?
Yeah, what did she do? Where did this originate? Oh, and now I found my answer. Because they would dress differently and just wink at them back in the day.
It's seen as she is the instigator.
Instigator, yeah. And men, oh, poor men are so weak. And I mean, if someone blinks at them, they have to, right? Oh, poor men. They have the will of a snail.
Hey, don't insult snails.
Yeah, true. Snails are cute.
I take that very personally.
I'm sorry. Didn't mean to upset you. Okay, so you know how you talked about the
symposiums?
Well, they had theater halls where prostitution was practiced, and actresses were paid by men to go to the backstage, and they were called for private theatricals. So if you went and approached an actress and went, do you want to come backstage for private theatricals? You would know what that means.
So there were also women that had a job?
Yeah. I think that's why I thought of your class system, because these ones were women that would be like actors, right? Not everyone was an actor. You think actresses were more high up on this class system? So, and then they would approach them differently. They would go backstage, and they had like areas where they were specifically designed for this. They had private rooms. So that's why I thought this was more of their high end, because not all women that did prostitution belonged to the middle class. They were from the higher classes as well. They were probably just approached differently and had a different system rather than just working on the street.
That's fascinating.
And also there were men as well that were working in the theater halls. Even though homosexuality was illegal, there was a writer that had a meeting with a male prostitute.
Did you watch The Alienist?
Yes.
Because there they would have boy prostitutes.
Oh, okay. Now, getting into religion. So the church had obviously a big vendetta against them, right? I mean...
Really? Oh.
There was a whole movement that the church was promoting called the Angel of the House. So they were promoting this Angel of the House movement. It was like the shit back in the day.
Angel of the House.
Yes. From the church's point of view, it was a no-no to have sex for pleasure. It was like, no, if females have sex for pleasure and they enjoy it, you risk to have a heart attack and to damage your nervous system. That was literally what they were saying.
Oh.
But if you're married, that doesn't matter. You won't have a heart attack. You won't damage your nervous system because of how used you are to your husband's face, and because it's so boring that it doesn't excite you anymore. And I was like,
are you making this up?
No. They literally said that.
Sounds made up.
I know. They literally, oh my God, it says.
Because as far as I know, the whole, don't have sex outside of marriage thing comes from, it's not even that. It's seen as a sin if you have sex without
your end goal being
without the intention of conceiving, which is why masturbation is also frowned upon. I think maybe that was the original text, and it sort of got into this, you're not supposed to have any pleasure at all, don't do anything, because I think that's also the problem with homosexual relationships.
Yeah, because there isn't,
you can't conceive. Therefore, you're not supposed to have sex.
So they said, and I quote, "A Victorian female sexual appetite should have been negligible and unnatural." And I end quote. So apparently being horny was viewed as dangerous, right? We got that clear. You should not be horny. And so this was called the Angel of the House mentality, when you would just...
Where did that come from? Angel of the House. What's that supposed to mean?
Because you're the Angel of the House. How more explicit do you want me to make it?
Oh, is that what I am? I did not think of it that way.
Because you're just there to serve God.
But am I Is it okay in Christianity to think of yourself as...
No, you're not thinking of yourself as an angel. They were just wanting to rebrand, so people would be like, oh no, I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to be as close to an angel as possible.
Oh, I see.
Do you know what I mean? It was just so that the wives, it was the men in the aristocratic class. They just wanted to make sure their wives weren't tempted to go into prostitution or, I don't know, have affairs. So they would use this religious angel of the house thing to keep them motivated to stay faithful. That's how I view it personally. But what is absolutely hilarious is that the men that were agreeing to these rules, right? They all belong to the aristocratic, because they were the ones that were voting on all these things, right?
Right.
So they were getting frustrated with their wives because their wives didn't want to have sex unless there was a child involved, right? No, not involved. Jesus, not involved. A child.
Don't involve children.
The child was the goal. So they wanted to have children.
Right. My wife is so boring.
Yeah. So these men...
What? It makes no sense.
No, and these men were the main customers of prostitutes.
Oh my God.
Because they were so frustrated with their wives, they were going to prostitutes. And the prostitutes were like, well, I need money. They have a shit ton of money. And they're frustrated. So,
Dude,
this vicious circle.
Get a grip.
And I was like, oh, it's just poetic almost.
How is that even possible? How can you be that stupid?
It's funny.
I wonder why all these women don't want to have sex with me.
And I wonder why there's so many women that do this. Oh, God forbid, why would you go into prostitution?
Right.
There were also much more women than men. The number of women during that time was higher than men. So a lot of women, if you think of it from a numbers point of view, weren't going to get married because there weren't enough men.
I see.
Later on, so the sad thing is the average age of prostitution was between 18 and 22, but there were young girls as well that would go in as young as 12.
I was expecting it to be a lot
Younger?
A lot younger.
I mean, 12 is still young.
It is, but considering that the average age was 18 to 24.
Oh, yeah. I was surprised about that as well, yeah.
Those are, well, they're not great, obviously.
They were still going to school, so they kind of had the school support.
I suppose. And also back then, people had to grow up pretty early.
Yeah, I mean, what was the average, 45 years? The lifespan.
No, it wasn't 45, come on.
They were nasties.
Well, maybe during the Industrial Revolution, because you had all that pollution.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
But
and all the shit out of the window.
Dude, I would die instantly.
Oh.
Throw shit on me, I'm dead.
I had a pigeon shit on my head once, and it kind of fell in my face close to my eye, and I was freaking out. I thought I had pigeon shit in my eye. Imagine back then just walking and being scared you'll get shit in your face.
Ew.
Another thing that kind of disturbed me, and I want to disturb you too, I'm sorry.
Oh. Come on, I was having fun.
Sorry. So because there were so many people, they were so crowded, they would have to live like 4 people in one room. And then that would mean they would sleep more people in one bed, which led to cousins. It was a thing. It was called Cousin's Kiss because some things would happen between members of the family as well. Because they were always so crowded and so close and,
And they were also sheltered due to religious interference. Never mind.
Another interesting thing was that the middle class actually didn't see sex as in a bad way. It was something common for them to just enjoy sex as an enjoyment, how the aristocracy and the church wanted to have it as a no.
Oh, so all the thing with all that angel of the house propaganda was just for the people that were the higher class.
Well, no, they were promoting it to every class, but those people were more adherent to it because they were the aristocrats. They had to at least look like they were respecting the rules, right?
All right.
More than the middle class, which was the working class, you know how they would view it.
Which one would you prefer?
Like the peasants.
Which one would you prefer?
To be part of?
Yeah, if you had to choose.
Middle class.
Yeah, I think I would probably choose the middle class as well.
I mean, I don't know, because then I just thought of all the factors, and there's yes and no's for both classes that I can think of.
I don't know. Like, yeah, maybe...
I'd rather be married with someone that I don't love, and...
But everyone is breathing down your neck to be this, so pure, perfect wife, perfect, boring wife.
And have 7
children. You're not allowed to think for yourself. You're not allowed to do anything. You just sit and look pretty all day.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a life for me, man.
It's difficult because, I love my freedom. But then again, if you think of the middle class, they didn't have that many rights. So if something did happen, at least in the higher class, you're kind of sheltered. I'm not saying things couldn't happen then, but maybe you don't have access to terrible people like that as much as...
Yeah, that's also true.
Being in the working class.
Because you said Victorian era, right? So that means that if you were working in the slums, then you could have been one of Jack the Ripper's victims.
Yeah, that was another thing on my research, that Jack the Ripper was notoriously known for murdering prostitutes. Even though they were killed by other people as well, he was the most famous one and the most prolific and constant one. They were his victims during that time.
Well, that's the sadness of the situation. Well, it could be applied even today. Most serial killer victims are prostitutes, which is very sad.
Later on, there was a reform where they wanted to, quote, integrate the prostitutes back into society, end quote, like asylums and houses where they would help them. Well, there's this one house, it's called the Magdalene Asylum, where they were pretty brutal, and it wasn't really helping them. It was mainly just to keep them away from society and just forget about them. They would have to pray constantly and live in silence, and they would have to do really hard labor. So it wasn't...
But why would someone... Was it mandatory?
I think so. It was a reform. So yeah, they would probably just pick them up and lock them in there. Because it was an asylum.
Why would someone choose to live that way?
The last one of these asylums, which I thought was crazy, was closed in 1996. From 1901 to 1996.
Was it repurposed? Was it used for something else? Maybe it was more like a shelter.
A shelter, yeah, where they would get sanitary stuff, help, like consultation, like...
I see.
Maybe they changed it because that would have been illegal.
Yeah, that's true.
That pretty much concludes my research.
It's interesting because we began by calling prostitution the world's oldest profession, which, it's obviously ongoing, hasn't gotten away. I doubt it'll ever go away. Yeah, obviously it's much better now that we have certain, well, not every country, but maybe it's a beginning of a movement. Maybe in 50 years, 100 years, things will be better and we'll be able to protect the workers better.
Yeah. Let's just say we just found this interesting as it's not a very talked topic.
Right. That's true. We didn't mention that at all.
No. So that's why, we've never talked about this with each other, but I thought it would be an interesting topic to just, what do you think about this? What have you found out? Because it happened. It did happen. You can't say it didn't happen. It's still happening.
And it's still, it's still happening.
It's still happening.
It should be more easy to speak about these things. It shouldn't be a taboo. People do it. People request it.
Yeah.
And it's the truth of life, of the world.
We just hope you found this interesting and maybe do your own research and find out more. But I've seen an interesting documentary about Louis Theroux. he stayed at a house where in America. I'm not sure the location, but he stayed there for a week or two with a family. Opened this house where women would do sex work, and they would have a bed, they would be paid, they would have food. And I think it was this couple, because the wife, did it when she was young and decided with her husband later on to open a sex working house. They would be taken care of, they could leave, they could come back.
And was it legal?
Yes, it was legal. I think it was in one state where it was legal.
So they would have women that were hired?
Yeah, it was literally a house, a big house with a pool, and they would live there. Everyone had their own room where they would sleep and they would work. And they had a kitchen. The owners were there as well to help them and work with them. They would be paid. They would pay taxes. It was really interesting. And he stayed there for quite a while to just see how it works. I recommend it. It's interesting.
You see, I watched, what was it called? The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Dolly Parton. So it's this musical essentially where Dolly owns a brothel in Texas, and it's super cute. Aww. And she's taking care of her girls.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, and the girls in the Louis Theroux documentary, they were there because they wanted to. Some of them were just doing it for a while so they can save money and go study.
Oh.
That's why a lot of people... There was this young girl that was saying she never wanted to do this as a career. She just wanted to save some money.
Oh, I see.
And then go study and get a proper job.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of them, it was just a stop in their lives. Similar to the lady I told you about where she did it for 3 years and then she was the landlady of a cafe. A lot of them were just doing it as a way of making a lot of income in a short time.
It was the same with the girls in Dolly's movie.
As always, the links to the articles we have researched will be in the description. And if you know stories or more articles that you think we should read, or more topics related to prostitution that we haven't touched upon that you think we should research and talk about, write them down below.
We enjoyed it, so we hope you did as well. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you, bye.